Hello and welcome back to Disney Journey. I'm retired Imagineer Jim Shull, and on this episode, I'm going to be answering a question I get a lot of. What's my favorite ride at DCA? And the answer, it really depends upon the day of the week, and it's usually one that I worked on. So in this episode, I'm going to be talking about the Orange Stinger and how it became the Silly Symphony Swings and what part I had in that transformation. In 2001, when Disney's California Adventure opened to guests, the entire park was around 55 acres. And of that, over 5 acres was given to Paradise Bay. And this was the location for Paradise Pier. Now, eventually, it would be home of Silly Symphony Swings. However, before the swings, there was the Orange Stinger. It's the same ride system with a different overlay. And before the ride opened, there was the announcement of Disney's new California Dream that was going to be in the parking lot. And so before Disney's California Adventure could be, the parking lot had to go away. And that led to the construction. And you can see the coaster. But before the construction, there was the preview center. And before the preview center, there was concept art for what was originally called Surf City. And many of the rides that the park opened with had different names, but it had that sensitivity of a seaside amusement pier. Designing a ride based on oranges made perfect sense. After all, this was Orange County, California. And the Disneyland Resort, once upon a time, had been farmland and ranch land and orchard land. So this was a homage, and it made perfect sense. Orange County, California celebrates its farming heritage, even to the point of placing oranges on their city seal. My earliest memories of going to Disneyland were driving by the last of the orange groves, and they were flanked by tall windbreaker trees. And occasionally I could see some of the old remaining railroad. And the rails, well, they celebrated the past. But the future is what mattered. And so the Disney California Adventure began. As we see here in the concept art, Paradise Pier's purpose was to carry a lot of the ride capacity. And it did in different ways. There was a surfboard, there were the tugboat ride. There were a lot of things that just didn't get built. But what was consistent from the very beginning was the Orange Stinger. The brochures, the marketing art, the model, even the fun map celebrated that fact. The Orange Stinger opened at DCA, but it was to have a short life. Although the ride was short-lived, the Orange Stinger could have succeeded, and perhaps should have. It had the history of Orange County, California behind it, the history of orange groves, even there on the Disneyland property, a large, iconic surround for this standard ride. And it had bees, lots and lots and lots of bees. And the ride should have been successful in another way. The merchandise program was huge. But getting back to those bees, the bees were surrounds on standard seats and accompanied by the buzzing sound. It made for a great show. But the problem with the bee seats were they were subject to wear, and they did not last. And when they failed, they exposed the standard ride system, the standard seat. And the standard seat is what remains on the ride even to this day. So the ride again had a lot of promise, but it didn't have a long life. When I became part of the team for DCA 2.0, I faced the challenge of what to do with the Orange Stinger. It wasn't going to stay that, but it was going to become something yet to be determined. I'll pause here to underline that not everything in every park needs to be an e-ticket.
The sea tickets or flat rides are part of the tapestry that makes a day in a park so enjoyable. They carry a lot of capacity, they have low cost to install, and they become memories. Dumbo started as, well, kind of a throwaway in Anaheim, but now it became the linchpin and a foundation of all the Disney parks. I'm not saying that Swings is in that pantheon, but I think it does add to the texture and the enjoyment of a day in Disney California Adventure.
Now back to the Stinger. The ride that was going to replace it had to fit in the vocabulary of a reimagined Paradise Pier, one that was set back in the heyday of classic lakeside and ocean amusement piers. Now, in the case of the Orange Stinger, though, it had another problem. It had a rival, in fact, it had a copy, and it was just up the street, a short drive in Buena Park, California. Because there, at Knott's Berry Farm, Knott's had a version of the Wave Swinger, which is the name, a generic name for this type of ride system. You could dial up the vendor and say, "Hey, I'd like a Wave Swinger," and they'd say, "Sure, send us a check." It's that common. The challenge to retheme the Orange Stinger was a pretty significant one because this was a ride system that was oh so common in the ride industry. In fact, there was just one just down the street, a 10-minute drive in Buena Park, California, at Knott's Berry Farm. So what I thought about was taking something which is so very common, how do you make it special? How do I make it something that people want to see and ride and enjoy? And there are a lot of things that I'd already thought about in the past. And in this case, it happened to involve a little mouse and a band concert. The idea of featuring Mickey Mouse in his famous role as the band concert conductor had been on my radar for many years. Whenever I pitched the idea and everyone agreed, it was a good one. The question is where to put him. Now, it just so happened during the time I was working on the expansion of the Walt Disney Studios park, I drew up some art and pitched the idea of creating the band concert coaster. But it wasn't to be. No, I took the idea though and I brought it to Anaheim when I started working on, well, what became the Silly Symphony Swings. Now, ideas are just lines on paper until someone funds them. And I went through many pieces of paper and lots of pens to create this artwork that was then shared to the project team, who then agreed, yes, this was a really good idea and one we should do. Now, the old Golden Vine Theater was repurposed during the DCA expansion and reimagining as the Blue Sky Cellar. And I've got to tell you, a lot of artwork was shared in a way that was unique to WDI and unique to the Disney company, because this was real artwork, even down to the point of getting old storyboards from The Office. So next, all we needed to do was to build it. Once the decision was made to reimagine California Adventure, the second decision was made not to close the park. And as a direct result, a set of construction walls were created. Now, each one of those wall panels had a custom graphic, and there was a battle plan in Glendale on how they were going to move during the entire project cycle, which covered several years. I mean, it's a thing of beauty. Whenever I started a project at WDI, I always had a set of goals in mind. And I returned over and over again during the project life cycle to look to see if I had met my goal. Now, one of the goals that I set for myself in Paradise Pier and its reimagining was to take away the harshness. Now, I understand what the designers were trying to do with the first version of DCA, but man, it was cold and harsh, hard and bare. Little shade, little relief, and the lagoon, which is way far away, one that you can never touch. And the water in Paradise Pier was in an appetizing shade of green.
The path to create any ride in any Disney park is never simple. And I had multiple commitments when I was doing the Silly Symphony Swings. In addition to overseeing all of the work that was being done on Paradise Pier, I was also committed to working on not one, but two projects in Paris. So once I completed all of the concept work and art and layouts and the plan forward for the swings, it was Maggie Parr who picked up the baton and so beautifully created the canvas and the finish art.
Early on in my design process, I recognized the value of having 5 acres of water. This was something that could be leveraged, and so part of the design was to create a deck underneath the swings in order to have a shaded and restful place for guests of all ages to enjoy. The swings themselves are a showcase piece there on the pier. The swings are among my favorite projects because so many of the problems that the pier had, I got to solve.
Pre-internet and social media, we relied upon letters, and Marty Sklar was the champion of the written word. And therefore, Marty would make sure that I would receive all of the letters and comments from guests on the designs I'd created. One of my very favorite letters was one that he sent me from a family thanking me for creating a restful spot underneath the deck of the Silly Symphony Swings. They had a multi-generational family and the grandparents just weren't up to another trip around the park. So sitting there under the shade, looking at the water of Paradise Bay was the high point of their day, they wrote me. And that's a letter that I'll always be grateful for.
And so years after I had the idea of creating a ride based around the band concert, with Mickey Mouse in his famous role as a conductor, it finally happened. It was years later and countries away, but it did happen. And I think that's what matters. As I said before, of all the projects I've done at WDI, the band concert Silly Symphony Swings is among my favorite because it solves so many problems, not just with that ride, but for DCA itself. It grounded that park and a ride in well-valued intellectual property. A favorite character presented in a delightful way with wonderful music in a humorous way. It was a ride for the entire family.
And with that, we bring this episode of Disney Journey to a close. And there'll be another one soon, as you all know by now. Meanwhile, thanks for subscribing, liking, and hitting the bell notification button so that you too can be the first in your block to find out when a new episode drops. But until the next time, it's now goodbye from autumn in Lost Canyon.